Hey, what's going on there, guys? I'm back here today with another deck tech for you. So today we are going to be taking a look at a modern deck, and it's blue-black Tezzeret control. Now, back whenever Scars of Mirrodin was still in standard, blue-black Tezzeret control was one of my favorite decks to play. It played artifacts, it had a really nice control theme to it, and overall it just had a whole lot of synergy working around Tezzeret and all the artifacts that we had. So basically, I wanted to find a good Tezzeret build to play for Modern, and I was tampering around with it, especially with some of the cards that I used to play in Tezzeret Control back before, and then tried to include some newer cards and some stuff that Modern has to offer with how big Modern is in comparison to just Standard. So before we get to taking a look at this deck and what cards I chose to include in this deck, if you guys have any suggestions for decks that you would like to see on the channel, please leave them in the comments down below. And also be sure to check out the playlists in the description down below, where I have all the previous modern decks that I've covered on the channel, and also a playlist to budget decks that you guys can check out for anybody that wants to play Magic but doesn't want to spend a ridiculous amount of money on it. So, starting off and taking a look at this deck, we have all of our artifacts, and more specifically, we have our artifact creatures. So, the first one is Spellskite. So, I have Spellskite as a 2-of, and he's a 0/4 for 2, and for 1 Phyrexian blue mana, we can change a target of target spell or ability to Spellskite. So, Spellskite is really awesome up against decks like Infect and decks like Hexproof Enchantments, the Boggle decks, where we can start shifting what our opponent's trying to do, where they're trying to enchant their creatures or buff up their creatures, and we can shift that onto Spellskite. Equally, the Spellskite can be used to redirect any artifact hate that our opponent may have for cards like Vedalken Shackles, or any of the other big things that we have, like Wurmcoil Engine, Batterskull. Spellskite can very easily just redirect it to the Spellskite, and then we don't miss out on having one of our bigger things still be on the board. So Spellskite is awesome for that. It's still a 0/4 body for 2 mana, which makes it great up against aggressive aggro. We have one dedicated blocker on the board early on. I have a playset of Solemn Simulacrum, so he's a 2/2 for 4. Whenever he enters the battlefield, we can search our library for a basic land and put it on the battlefield tapped. Whenever he dies, we draw a card. So he basically is going to be one of the easiest ways to fuel Shackles, because Shackles is going to be playing off of how many islands that we have. So Solemn Simulacrum can go and just fetch up more islands for us. If we need black mana, I do have a Singleton Swamp in the deck as well, so we can go and fetch that up. If we weren't able to get into any of our Watery Graves, other dual lands, or we didn't hit a fetch land to be able to fetch like Watery Grave. So the Solemn ends up being really awesome for just kind of fixing for us if we need it, but more so fueling Shackles. And whenever he dies, we get to draw. I have 1 Phyrexian Metamorph, which is a 4 cost, 3 generic and 1 Phyrexian blue, so it can be 3 mana and 2 life for us instead if we want to go for that. And it's going to be a copy of any artifact or creature on the battlefield whenever it comes in. So we can get another copy of something like Batterskull, we can get another copy of Wurmcoil Engine, or any of the other artifacts that we have on the board if it's relevant for us, or one of our opponent's creatures, because our creatures are good. They're not like incredibly amazing. Solemn and Spellskite are really good, but aside from that, like Wurmcoil Engine is really going to be the only big thing that we want to copy with the Metamorph. But if our opponent has something that's pretty big and pretty powerful, we might want to copy that, so the Metamorph is nice for that. I have the 2 Wurmcoil Engine here, so our Artifact Titan for the deck. So he's a 6/6 for 6, Death Touch lifelink, and whenever he's put into a graveyard from the battlefield, we put a 3/3 Worm with Death Touch and a 3/3 Worm with lifelink. So he just spreads up from being a 6/6 into having 2 3/3s, and he distributes his Death Touch and lifelink to the 2 tokens. So Wurmcoil Engine is just ridiculously awesome. If we can copy him up, he's pretty nice. And with Tezzeret, Tezzeret can go digging with his +1 to find Wurmcoil Engine for us. But with the lifelink, it is going to be a really, really big way to gain back 6 life every turn. Then we have 1 Engineered Explosive. So the Engineered Explosive is going to either be 0, 1, or 2 for us, because off of Sunburst, the most we can get is 2, with our deck only being able to generate either black or blue mana. So Engineered Explosives is really good up against aggro, and it can get rid of 2 converted mana cost creatures really, really easily. It can also deal with 1 converted mana cost creatures even easier. It's going to be a little bit more easy to cast. But Engineered Explosives is pretty much like Ratchet Bomb, only it's a little bit more quick. We don't have to wait to build it up. And then whenever we have the 2 mana open, we can sack and just destroy everything, rather than having to wait 2 turns to be able to build it up, get it to 2 counters, or in this case, having it be Sunburst of 2 instead of like the Ratchet Bomb where you have to build up the counters. We don't have that stall time where we have to wait to use it up against aggro. It's a little bit more immediate, but it's really awesome up against like tokens and stuff like that. Equally, we have the 2 Ratchet Bombs, which again are awesome against tokens, but we do have to build it up, and that's kind of sometimes slow. But at the same time, it deals with bigger things if we want to go for that 3 mana good stuff. If we want to go like get rid of Blood Moons or stuff like that, even though Blood Moon isn't as bad, we don't have to worry about it as much, but it does keep us away from black mana if they decide to go and play Blood Moon. Our fetch lands aren't really as useful, and we have to bank off of Solemn to go fetch our swamp. So the Ratchet Bomb lets us get rid of stuff like Blood Moon. Equally, it lets us get rid of creatures and tokens pretty easily as well. So Ratchet Bomb is pretty universal for aggro tokens, getting rid of enchantments that are low in converted mana cost. I have 1 Cranial Plating, which may seem like it's kind of misfit here. The Cranial Plating is actually for any of our big creatures. If we take our opponent's creatures and we have a clear board, it's also going to be used for our manlands. So I have 2 Creeping Tar Pits in the deck. So with Creeping Tar Pit being unblockable, we can throw Cranial Plating onto it and swing in with a pretty decently sized amount of damage in that swing. So the plating is pretty nice for that. It seems like a kind of unusual card, but I did want to have it just as a one-of, because it allows me to just kind of push a little bit bigger forward with anything that I have, where I'm trying to control what my opponent's doing. I'm trying to control their creatures, but when I do take a creature with like Shackles or something like that, I can use the plating on it and then just bash my opponent's face with their own creature. So I just mentioned it. We have the Vedalken Shackles. So I have it as a 3-of, and Shackles is 3 converted mana cost to play it, or 3 mana to play it, and we can choose not to untap it during our untap step. 2 mana, and we can tap it and gain control of target creature with power less than or equal to the number of islands that we control, as long as the Shackles remains tapped. So with this deck, with Solemn letting us fetch more islands, and just having a pretty large amount of basic lands in the deck, and also shock lands as well that count as islands, the Shackles end up being pretty big, and we can take some pretty sizable creatures with it. So it's an easy way to get our opponent's things and use them against our opponent. I have 1 Crucible of Worlds, so 3-cost artifact. We can play lands from our graveyard. So this is really awesome up against matchups where our opponent has means of blowing up our lands and keeping us away from our man lands, maybe even some of our dual lands as well. If our opponent's trying to disrupt what we're doing in that sense, we have the Crucible where we can play it, we can get stuff back. It's really, really awesome whenever we're able to just keep on playing Ghost Quarters off of the Crucible every turn and blowing up our opponent's lands. And it just gets to be even more sweet whenever our opponent doesn't have the basic lands that they can just search for off of Ghost Quarters. So Crucible ends up being really perfect. But like getting something back like Academy Ruins, if our opponent uses like Ghost Quarter or Tech Edge on it, is nice. Just having the Crucible there to be able to get that back. Then I have 1 Batterskull, 5 cost, living weapon, enchanted or equipped creature. I keep on saying enchanted for equipments for some reason, but equipped creature gets +4/+4 and has Vigilance Lifelink for 3 mana. We can bounce back Batterskull to our hand, and then we can recast it if we want. So Batterskull ends up being really nice just to have the living weapon, have the 0/0 germ, have it be a 4/4 Vigilance Lifelink. We can bounce it back and recast it if need be. We can also throw it onto one of our opponent's creatures if we take it with Shackles, and we can just swing in with that. But ultimately, Batterskull is just an easy way to gain back life, kind of like the Wurmcoil Engine. Then we have our Tezzeret. So Tezzeret is a 4-cost, 3 loyalty, +1 lets us look at the top 5 cards of our library. We can reveal an artifact, put it into our hand, put the rest onto the bottom of our library in any order. -1 makes a artifact a 5/5 artifact creature, and -4 has target player lose X amount of life and we gain X amount of life, where X is twice the number of artifacts we control. So obviously the ultimate is going to be pretty sizable for us. It may not be like a ridiculous number or anything like that, especially because I'm not running like Darksteel Citadel or anything. Just because I still wanted to have like appropriate mana, didn't want to get like screwed here or there, and I still wanted to run Ghost Quarters. But Tezzeret ends up just being a whole lot of value for us and being able to dig and also use his ultimate. I have two Doomblade for being able to destroy non-black creatures for 2 mana. It's pretty straightforward. A playset of Mana Leak to have to be able to counter spells unless our opponent is going to pay 3 for it, and at 2 mana, that's really reasonable and really easy to cast, especially early on if our opponent's playing like tempo or even trying to build up and do stuff with like control or anything like that. So Mana Leak keeps things in check, and for a cheap amount of mana. I have 2 Thirst for Knowledge, so draw 3 cards to discard 2 cards unless we discard an artifact. With Academy of Ruins, even if we discard an artifact, we can put it on top of our library, so it's not a big deal. Again, if our opponent gets rid of our Academy of Ruins, we can bank off of getting like Crucible onto the battlefield, getting it back, and then still getting value off of putting our artifacts back on top. So Thirst just lets us dig pretty decently for the 3 mana. I have 3 Cryptic Commands, so instant for 4, and it has 4 abilities. We can choose 2 of them, so we can counter a spell, return a permanent to its owner's hand, tap all creatures our opponents control, or draw a card, any combination of the 2. Usually it's like countering and drawing, tapping down and drawing, or bouncing and drawing, but it's kind of interchangeable. It just depends on the situation. And then we have 2 Damnation, so the Damnation, just a Wrath for anything that's really hyper-aggressive. 4 mana, sorcery speed, destroy all creatures, they can't be regenerated. Pretty straightforward. So those are the spells that we have, the creature spells and other spells. Now let's take a look at what our land base looks like. So for our lands here, we have a playset of Scalding Tarn, so we can crack it and we can search for Watery Grave or any of our basic islands. So basically we're just going to be going for our Watery Graves whenever it's earlier on and we need the black mana. Once we get to the point where we already have like 3 black producing lands, then we might as well just go for our islands. But either way, either fetching the Watery Graves or the islands, both of them are going to fuel our Vedalken Shackles. So either way, we just kind of benefit from that, and it does thin out our deck a little bit. It's not a huge margin, but it does thin it a little bit. We have the playset of Watery Grave, so dual subtype, taps for blue or black, and if we really want it to come in untapped, we can pay the 2 life. We have a playset of Drowned Catacomb. Unfortunately, it doesn't interact with Shackles, but it does provide blue or black mana to our mana pool. It allows us to play our things that we need. 2 Creeping Tar Pit, which are our only 2 man lands here, and we can turn it into a 3/2 elemental creature with unblockable. And the only downside is it enters tapped, but ultimately we can throw on plating onto it and swing for a decent bit. I have 1 Academy of Ruins to be able to put target artifact from our graveyard on top of our library for 2 mana and a tap. It just taps for generic mana on its own. 3 Ghost Quarter to be able to blow up lands, and this is for any of my opponent's man lands, or if I'm playing up against Tron. Tron's something that is really quick in what they're trying to do, so if they can set up their perfect hand where they can start playing things like Karn and Wurmcoil Engine early on, then we're kind of screwed. We don't want them to be playing really quick, a lot quicker than anything that we can do or react. So the Ghost Quarter is pretty easy to blow up the Urza lands, and we can keep our opponent from being able to get their whole package going from them and generating a whole lot of mana. So the Ghost Quarter disrupts that. We can go and surgically extract. We can go side in our surgical extractions and extract their copies of their non-basic lands and get rid of them so they can't play off of them as well. So it's nice for that. But Ghost Quarters for Tron and for man lands. And then we have our basics, so we just have 6 basic islands and 1 basic swamp. So that's the main board, all of our spells and all of our lands. So now let's go and take a look at what we have in the sideboard. Alright, so for our sideboard here, the first card that we have is Chalice of the Void. And Chalice is a card that I chose to have a 3 of for just because it's really good for matchups where our opponent's playing a lot of really cheap things. So like decks like Red Deck wins because my opponent has a ton of 1-drop red spells where it's like they're all kind of like lightning bolt equivalents. We can play Chalice of the Void up against them, and it's going to be able to counter a huge amount of the things that they're playing. Chalice is also good up against Infect and up against the Hexproof Boggle decks as well. A lot of their enchantments are going to be 1 or 2 mana, so if we can land Chalice for 1, which is going to be 2 mana for us, so we can effectively play it on turn 2. We can play Chalice for 1, and then if we're able to find another one, play Chalice for 2, and we can keep our opponent from doing a whole lot. There's very little that they're going to be able to do. But the Chalice enters the battlefield with X counters on it. Whenever a player casts a spell with converted mana cost equal to the number of charge counters on Chalice, counter that spell. So it's an easy way to keep any decks that have a lot of like 1 converted mana cost spells or 2 converted mana cost spells that they're trying to play effectively and just trying to rush us. So Chalice is an easy way to do that, especially, most importantly, the 1 converted mana cost stuff like Red Deck wins type variations. Those are the ones where you drop Chalice and they really just have a lot of their momentum just taken away. I have 2 Disfigures, so instant speed, 1 black, target creature gets -2/-2 until the end of the turn. This is for really fast aggro. We can just start getting rid of creatures our opponents have, especially value things if they're trying to have value out of things like Confidant or any stuff like that. Disfigure is nice for any smaller creatures early on. Then we have the 2 Echoing Truth. So Echoing Truth is more so for Splinter Twin than anything else, I would probably say. It's still useful in other situations too. Instant speed, 2 cost, and return a target non-land permanent and all other permanents with the same name as that permanent to their owner's hand. So we can side it up against other matchups too, but Echoing Truth is just nice up against Splinter Twin where we can just bounce back their copies that they're trying to produce. I have 1 Ghost Quarter, so we can side that in up against the Tron matchup just to have a little bit more consistency with getting our Ghost Quarters and keeping them from what they're trying to do. 2 Negate to counter non-creature spells, so up against any builds that are really non-creature spell heavy, we can side in the Negate, especially if our Shackles and our Damnations are lackluster and they're not really providing a whole lot for us. We might side out the Damnations and go for Negates and have more counter spells available. Then we have the 3 Surgical Extractions. So Surgical Extraction is something I love to play up against Tron. We can go Ghost Quarter, blow up one of their lands, and immediately go and use Extraction to get rid of all of the copies that they have. So it ends up being really, really perfect for that. But ultimately, Extractions for anything that is going to try to interact with their graveyard, any of their rights, or any of like the gifts decks, Loam, Dredge, any of those types of decks, we can go and play Surgical Extraction. Also, even Storm. We do have a little bit of value out of playing up against Storm, especially if our opponent, for some reason, already gets like a Grape Shot or something into their grave. We can go and get rid of all the rest of their copies of Grape Shot, especially if they're playing like Ascension or something like that, where they can just keep on duplicating their spells based off of Ascension already having its counters on there. So Surgical Extraction is mainly for the graveyard interactions. And then the last card is Witchbane Orb, which Witchbane Orb isn't... overly impressive, but it's what I chose to have because I can't use Leyline of Sanctities, because that's one of the cards that I really love to play whenever I have the availability to use white mana in a deck. But since we can't play white in this deck, and we don't really have the good probability, we don't have the consistency of having it in our open hand with just a 2-spot open in our sideboard for it, I just chose to run Witchbane Orb because it gives us hexproof, and it's going to be nice up against decks like Valakut and the Scape Shift Valakut builds, so we don't let Valakut be able to target us and deal damage to us. It is also going to be nice up against like red deck wins. We can get our Chalice of the Void out there, and then we can play like Witchbane Orb later and not let our opponent do that, do anything to us, that is. And ultimately, like anything that, it's pretty much the same explanation that I have for Leyline of Sanctity, where if our opponent has anything that's going to be targeting us a whole lot, we can just use Witchbane Orb and give ourselves hexproof, and we don't have to worry about stuff. So that is the main board and sideboard that we have here for blue-black Tezzeret control. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please be sure to drop a like on this video and subscribe for more Magic the Gathering content. The entire deck list is down below where you guys can use it as a reference. And also be sure to check out the playlist in the description down below, where I have all the previous decks that I've covered, including modern decks, budget deck techs. And also be sure to follow me on Twitter at AdjumantSinajob, and you guys can ask me questions and see what I'm working on for the channel. Until next time, guys, have yourselves a wonderful, fun-filled Magic the Gathering day.